Welcome to our 7th video in our series on characters of faith, where we look at biblical characters to understand how they encounter God and how they live their lives and see what we can learn for our lives today. And there's one book in the Bible. It's the book of Esther, where the word God isn't mentioned, but God infuses each and every page of the story. And this story is one that brings real life and hope. Hope for such a time as this. The story of Esther begins with Queen Vashti being disposed. It's as if she's just shifted out of scene, and the king wants a new wife. And so he sets up this beauty pageant from around the whole of his empire. And Esther herself wins this pageant. She's there now sitting as the queen. She's in the court and she's there in a position, but it's a very vulnerable position, a position from which the king could just dispose of her again, just push her to the side. And yet Esther was put there for a reason. In the meantime, in the background, Mordecai had actually saved the king, but no one had noted it. No one had seen it. Mordecai was Esther's uncle, the one who'd always looked out for her. And now Esther's in the palace. Mordecai is out in the grounds. In any palace, there are stories of intrigue, people who want to get on, mainly by dissing or getting rid of others. And this palace, there was no exception. Haman was there, and Haman didn't like the Jews. So he made this edict to get rid of all the Jews in the place. And Mordecai was distraught. And so he went around in sackcloth and ashes. And as he did so, word of it eventually got to Esther. And Esther said to her uncle, "Stop this. Come on, it's okay." And her uncle said to her, "No, this is what you need to know. That you might hide away in the palace, but others will die. Perhaps God has put you there for such a time as this, that you might save his people, that you might have the opportunity of being the person of influence at this time." And so we pick up this story in chapter 4, verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" That was Mordecai's comment. Mordecai knew that God was still going to deliver his people, that God would come through. But Mordecai realized that Esther was put in place for such a time as this. It was up to Esther. It was up to Esther to play her part, to step out and be willing to be brave and speak to the king. So often in the New Testament, it talks about how we'll be given words in the places we need to have words. When we're not sure what to say, we'll be given courage and the words to say. Why? Because each of us is often placed in places where God is at work, whether we realize it or not. And there are moments in our lives where God wants us to speak. Why? Because his kingdom will come. Because it's for such a time as this that you need to speak something of God, of his truths. But you see, Esther knew that she couldn't quite do it on her own. She knew that she needed the strength of others, just like you and I sometimes can't do it on our own when we know that we should speak, but we are unsure of what to say or how to do it. And so here she asked Mordecai to help. And the story carries on in the next verse, verse 15. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Esther's words remind us so much of the place of faith. She needed the support of others. She prepared for 3 days, 3 being that important number in the Bible, Jesus even being in the tomb for 3 days, preparing for 3 days for the words that she was going to say. And then at the end of the time of those 3 days, she was going to go, strengthened by her friends, strengthened by the Lord, her friends who'd fasted and prayed, the Lord who was with her. And she had these simple words, if I perish, I perish. It's exactly the same kind of attitude as Mary. Let it be to me as the Lord has said. It is a simple, humble trust. If I perish, I perish. Why? Because I'm doing this for the Lord and I'm trusting him and I will see him come through for me. When we read the rest of the story, we see how she's very clever and very wise in how she wins round the king, and how God intervenes in the way that the king has a dream and then remembers Mordecai. He remembers what he'd done as he's reading books and honors him, and how Haman's plot is totally foiled and he ends up being killed on the very hangman's noose that he'd set up for Mordecai. The reality is that this story hinged on a simple moment of a girl who'd been placed as a queen, a girl who had an opportunity for such a time as this, and for her willingness to trust and to follow God as others supported and prayed for her, God's deliverance comes. For us, there are moments that we are called to speak, to act, to listen. And sometimes we just need to understand the times and have others that are willing to encourage us, and for us to know that we were placed in our workplaces and our homes for such a time as this. And that as we follow the prompting of the Lord, lives will be saved and the world will be changed.